Hey everybody, welcome to the last Dev Talk Show of 2023. I came very close to like putting 2024 up in the title because my brain's already a little scrambled about it, but it is December 29th, a Friday of 2023, and with the new year ending over the weekend, this is probably this is the last time I think Rich and I will get together, and great to have you all here all year. How's it going, Rich?
It's going well. It's going well. It's been a good bit of time away earlier in the week, so that was fun. And yeah, it's the end of 2023 for as far as us doing the show, and it's kind of interesting. Just real quickly, I brought up the stats looking back, and we've only what was great for us is that we got through the latter half of the year doing this experiment around, hey, let's try and do something before we do stand up or before we start our real jobs. And it's actually worked quite well.
Yeah.
We've been able to be pretty much consistent with doing at least one a week. The day seems to fluctuate, but there's a good bump in engagement and bump in subscribers and all the cool things you look for when to see if you're going in the right direction. So I think from that perspective, it's been 2023 has been pretty successful in figuring out how to do this show again.
Yeah, thanks to everybody who has watched. In today's show, we're going to begin talking a little bit about components, just so if you're joining us and wondering what you're going to see. We're still learning a lot about this, so this may not be like some other shows. Some of the most popular ones where I think the most popular show of the year was when the first time we looked at Blazor UI identity when it came out in .NET 8 RC2. That was by far. Well, actually, I take it back because a very close number two, not too far off, was the episode where we said, hey, let's just start new projects and look at the templates and maybe compare them to how they used to look. And, so Blazor really led the way all year long. And that's great. There's obviously a lot of excitement about it. And some shows, I think we have explored the topic enough that it's a good hour of information. And then other times, as folks who have joined the show know, it's us learning about it. And so I think this is going to be more of one of those learning ones. But I do want to say, just looking really quickly at analytics that are last 365 days, for a small channel like ours, we've added 190 subscribers, which is a bump of 157%, which is amazing. And the watch time is up over 100%. The views are up over 100%. So that means everything doubled.
Yeah.
And thank everybody who's watching. Thanks everybody who's come and joined us, offered comments, offered us help in the chat, especially when we're lost. It's all fantastic and highly appreciated. And just it's great to see you all. So again, 2024 we'll keep going. It would be great if we could, maybe the evolution might be folks know ahead of time when we're going live and what the topic is. But even this sort of ad hoc, oh look, they're there, which I know every advice on streaming, on recording, on publishing, consistency, audience knows when you're doing what you're doing. All those rules are being broken, and yet still thank all of you for doubling. Really, I'd say it was a doubling this year of the impact of the show, and that is you folks who share, like, comment, subscribe, because then all of these platforms show them to other people. So, all right,
very cool. Thank you.
All right, so let's see. You've got a screen up, and I've gone ahead and added it.
Okay. Might as well dive in.
Yeah.
So let's maybe just back up a little bit and talk about what we're doing. So this is a project that I am doing just to kind of learn about Blazor, learn about some of the things we're doing in the OpenAI space, and it's just an example project essentially. But what it does, and let me see if I can bring up the right window here. So Graphics still need to be worked on, but the idea is
Mhm.
I've got some questions that we're asking people, right? So what's your favorite color? How are you feeling today? Things that we can use to basically get some adjectives or some definitions to send over to one of the services we have, which will generate an image. And we're kind of just, having, think of this being set up on a kiosk somewhere and people can punch in, their particular respond to the questions that they want to. We'll get a bunch of adjectives that we can then send to our DALL-E image generator and then come back with some kind of a unique image, right? Because even if we put the same content in there, it always gives back a separate image each time. So that's the goal of what this application does. The way it's structured and where I thought it was kind of interesting to bring the conversation into here. And Chris, feel free to, ask questions or interrupt as we go through this. There is essentially our home page that we were just looking at. So our home Razor page here. And this is all, it was started in .NET 7, but essentially all the code has been moved into a .NET 8 Blazor application. You can see I have basically in the solution, I have the old one and then the new one, which is all Blazor 8 essentially. So inside of here, we have our main page. When our main page loads, it goes talk to a data storage, not really important, but basically gets back those questions that you saw on the page. And what it does is it passes those questions. And for each question, there is a question component that gets painted. So each one of those boxes you see here is a Blazor component. And we can go into that Blazor component section and then be able to see kind of how it's painting those out. So it's taking the question text, and then for each one of those questions, there are multiple answers, and it's basically creating out a button for each one of those. So we're generating HTML inside of that component based on the model that gets bound to that particular component when it gets instantiated. So again, a question text, there's some answers. When we click that button, I think we might have saw this previously when we were doing some kind of an eventing with a button, where we pass in actually the value of that button. So not just the text that's on the front, but the underlying value, and use that to do our prompting over to the image generator. And then where we're kind of a little bit stuck at this point is this information at this point lies inside of a component. And when I go back to our main page, we have those components sitting here, but I need to be able to pass essentially the collection of all of the responses into another component. And this particular component is the one that's going to pull the image back from the service essentially. So that's just kind of a structure of the application, how we're using components, and the communication that we now need to put in place across those components. And I think what I did previously when I had this working in the .NET 7 version is we didn't really have the components talking to each other. It was the components were writing to essentially writing to a property that sat on the page, and using that as a way to maintain state and store that. So when I hit submit, I had that field that I could go look to and pull that out. And it seems that there should be a better way for us to communicate across these components and be able to more in real time update those values and get something back to send over to our image display component and get an image back. So that's kind of top to bottom how this is running.
Right.
And right now,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Where I was kind of heading, and I'm not sure that this is the right way either, is that we have a parameter here inside of our home page, and that parameter would then be visible to components in the question component area. And this part does it does see them, but I get into, and I haven't only just started playing around with this part, but I get into, where's the right place to new up this dictionary so that it's seen, because what's happening over here is the cascading parameters essentially being mapped based on the type that's there and saying, oh, well, I see an appropriate type. I'm going to pass that information down to this cascading parameter inside of the component. But there's some instances, it doesn't seem to be passing the correct instance, and it's getting a little lost there. And maybe I haven't referenced it the right way. So that's kind of where I'm stuck at this point. So that's where we want to kind of dive in.
Yeah, and so cascading parameters, I think you can attack this problem with them, but there could be folks watching who say, hey, it might not necessarily be the best way. There's always a lot of ways to do things, and
Right.
all of us are guilty of just getting something working and then you just live with it.
Yeah.
Right?
It works, put it aside, good, move on to the next thing.
And a few years later you say, how am I going to fix that thing? So
because you learn more and you look at it and you say, how the heck, why did I do that?
Why did I do that? So I'll take a couple clues from the documentation.
Okay.
When it
says, you want me to switch over
to I can switch, sure. Let me because that way I think it's easy to switch back to to yours as well. So if I take a clue from the documentation, this is the documentation on cascading values and parameters. And by way of introduction, we can say, hey, this is what they are. So if you're watching and you're saying to yourself, I don't even know, that a in a component hierarchy, because pages themselves are components in Blazor, and then components can contain components. And while if you've watched all of our videos, we haven't dove into this very much.
No.
The closest I think we've gotten is how the login component that I was trying to create, where I'm basically saying, I don't want a login page, I want a component, and I could put that component wherever I want. That's sort of that's kind of like heading down that path of saying, okay, now I'm going to do what we're supposed to be doing in Blazor, which is components containing components, and so on. So when we look at what a cascading value is, the first sentence, I think, gives us a little bit of a clue. This article explains how to flow data from an ancestor Razor component to descendant components. So I've got a component that houses components, and this article, Cascading Values and Parameters, talks about how you flow data down. Now, in the first two sentences, they use that term twice, flow data down. So I feel like there's a clue, because in your case, I think what you're doing is you're saying, I'm a component that houses all of these question components.
Yeah.
And I'm going to want to know what's going on in those question components. I'm the component that's adding them up, for example. Let's say it's kind of what you're doing. So the problem, though, is this article says flow down. So that's already a clue, right? I don't think that this is out of bounds, though, because I think what you did is you said, let me have the collection cascade down, and I'm just going to have the components write to it.
Yeah.
Outside of any issues that we're not thinking about in terms of concurrency, that seems like that should work as long as it's initialized. And the components down below say, well, I know that whatever I got to do, I have to write my answer to to this enumerable of whatever it is. It's a dictionary, it's a list, it's an array, who knows?
Yeah. Could be anything.
I guess that if we were being really nitpicky and like architecture wonky, we would say, well, here's the problem now is, first of all, now this component, it already probably knows more than it needs to. For example, that it's adding its answers to a collection.
Yep.
And then you might have some interesting issues in how does the parent collection make sure this stuff is initialized so that, first of all, it doesn't end up null at some weird time. Page lifecycle being something that's kind of not really in our control. We can go for rides on page lifecycle, but we can't, like, we don't know. User's going to hit refresh. What does that mean?
Right.
You got to solve all those problems. So I don't know, they talk about doing it here where they say, hey, in this particular case, oh, that's interesting. They're using some Doctor Who examples. I can't say I've actually looked closely at the examples, but they go ahead and register cascading values, but they do it through Program CS, which I think what they're doing is saying, like, what we've done now is we've added this cascading value for the entire component hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And so then here I am, another component. I know how to display these. I create a parameter that basically with the cascading parameter attribute. We've done this before in some of our code.
Yep.
And we can also have named cascading parameters if in case we want to separate a little bit. I don't know exactly. I mean, there might be more than one of these Daleks collections. I want this one.
Right.
So there are other ways, though. And I'm not going to say I'm that great at them, but I mean, they certainly are talking about things that you should be careful. Cascading multiple values. But what's interesting is there's these other things, cascading parameters also enable components to pass data across a component hierarchy.
Right.
Similar, maybe not quite. This isn't a cross. You're going back up.
Mm-hmm.
But I suppose that in this case where they're trying to basically have a tab set and they want the tab to know that it's the one that's active, probably because when it's active, they're just having the tabs do different things. I'm sure that's a pretty common situation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's other ideas. I had found this blog post. Let me see if I can find it again. This one here.
Okay.
Claudio Bernasconi. Hopefully I said that even close to correct. But it is a name that I am familiar with, who's written a lot of stuff. And he has a video on YouTube. And he offers 3 basic models. One is event callbacks, which I don't think is what you're talking about. An event callback makes sense when we have a nested component structure and want to call a method on the parent component from within the child. That's not what we're looking for. I don't think. You're aggregating data.
Not specifically, right? But we're aggregating data. But when you made the statement around the component knowing a little too much about where it's being hosted, that did start to send me down the path to thinking, well, maybe we just raise an event and anybody who's interested subscribes to it. And the homepage is what is the place where obviously that would wind up being of interest.
Yeah. Okay. So we can go back and look at that. And then cascading values, which we just talked about. Sometimes we don't have. What I love about this blog post is it sort of breaks it down from the wordy, the documentation way of saying things to this is more of we're having a conversation. Yep. Sometimes we don't have a simple parent-child. We want to build a component hierarchy. And then he says, we want to make information accessible to every child component without explicitly passing it down the component tree. Okay, well, that's what we talked about.
Yeah.
But then here's an interesting one: state containers. What I found really, really interesting is you can implement this yourself or use a library. So that tells me something we haven't explored is the libraries out there that are taking on some of the work that we're seeing in something like a Redux or a Flux or those kind of things in other frameworks. So create a context class registered as a dependency and inject it into the components that need access to the state. Okay. In this particular case, it looks to me like they're using this favorite animal approach. And I guess what you could have is a bunch of components that allow you to pick one. Like I picked the zebra component or the giraffe component, and then it goes, because it has access to this global, maybe the word global isn't quite, it's registered,
Mhm.
this registered dependency, it says, well, let me just go change it. Oh, and by the way, I could fire an event if I wanted to.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's kind of like what this is sort of, to me, is it's a little bit of the previous two combined, but on your own.
Right.
I think this is optional. I don't think you have to register an event, but what he's demonstrating is you could.
Sure.
And I could also provide a method that you could call that would set it.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, when it sets it, it could go register, it could go invoke the event, so that way everything is happening. The parent component might be listening for that event and say like, oh my gosh, it changed. I'd better go make sure I don't have to update the answer.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I feel like that's an interesting, it's really like, like it says here, implementing a shared service as a state container. And oh, that's interesting. Inspired by Microsoft documentation, but it doesn't have a specific, but then an article by Chris Hades. Now, this source code of this example project too.
Oh, wow.
In his
Okay.
GitHub repo. And a YouTube video and everything. So so in any case, those are some ideas. I don't know if we would want to try one of them. You said it's not working too well right now. Like, what kind of issues are you having?
So it's mainly getting that data back up to the homepage so that I can send it along. So that's, I did. And what I was doing was getting it to the point of, I'm not sure if that part's still in here. I think I might have deleted that part, but essentially taking this response that we got and writing it up to a parameter that was sitting on the homepage, essentially, just like dumping it into there, this input prompt text, and making that and writing that back up to there. But that didn't feel like the right thing to do, because it was just an HTML track, and shouldn't there be something in the components that lets us handle it, because they're kind of more aware? And that was where I started going down the parameters, cascading parameters part. And I was actually looking at doing something where we were more model binding. So going back to, could I, instead of this being just taking the model and passing in the question that we got as we went through the collection of questions, could this be, right? Could this just be that, right? And binding that value into the component, right? So almost like a data bind situation. So we could then see the state of that object and do change notification events from it. Turns out you can't do this because is it really? Yeah, there's the error there. Cannot assign to question because it is a for each iteration variable. So while conceptually it seemed that might make sense, you can't, the framework's not going to let us do that, essentially. So that's why we have to go back and actually bind the specific model that we've got for that component. Does that make sense? I think you're on mute.
I accidentally hit the mute button to cough there.
Oh.
Then I forgot to unmute it. So it's complaining when you tried to model bind.
Yeah.
Okay. It's saying cannot assign to question because it is a for each iteration variable. Oh, because it's the two-way data binding. And so, yeah, that's weird though, because okay, right. If it was a,
if it was just a one way, that would be, because we're just setting it. We're not wanting the value back at that point. We don't care if it gets updated. We don't care what happens to it once it gets painted to the screen.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because yours in your case, that model could be changing out from underneath you.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, the only thing that is going to change in the model, and we can probably look at what that. Hang on, here. I think it's here. The only thing in it that changes is this, right? That's the only value that would, because once we get the data from the database, everything here is the same. It's just whether that is the select, and select is probably the better term for it. What's the answer that the person has chosen.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing that would change out from underneath this, I guess.
So when you look at the documentation on binding, it does say supported types, primitive types, collections,
Mm-hmm.
complex types, recursive types, types with constructors, enums. So,
And I'm wondering, to the point, is there a way to define this as a one-way bind?
yeah.
Because there is such a thing, right?
I know in other environment frameworks that we've used, yes. But it's the kind of thing I haven't thought about until we really tried to attack it.
Yeah.
So you have you have both that you want notifying the parent component which one is active.
Yeah. When it changes. So really, and on change event, notify the parent.
Like that might be better than the is active, and like, because are you, or I don't know if you have this implemented yet, but are you essentially polling that to see what's active?
Yeah. I go through so once somebody hits a button, I then say, okay, let's go through all the answers, whatever. When the value equals the value that got sent down from the button click, then say that one is active, and somehow capture that response, right? Use that as the trigger to say that something happened.
Okay.
And then for everybody else, set it to false.
Well, that's interesting, because you do have it. What do you think about that being an event? It's almost like that state container example does seem to fit fairly well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you go through it, it does. I mean, having it, I think we're just raising it as a different type of event, because technically it is a mouse event in that we've triggered a button click, or
Yeah.
a button click was triggered. Sorry, it's Friday.
It's end of the year.
But you get the idea. Some event happened, and we can use that as a way of not just keeping it to this component, but signaling outside of the component as well. And I think it's a cool pattern to be able to include as part of and be aware of as part of what you can do in Blazor, because it's not the only time you're going to want to talk to components in a way and not know who's listening.
Yep. So it sounds like we have a plan where it's almost like what you're trying to do is you're using the tools that we know of so far, which is, hey, let me capture that somebody's clicked in a certain spot. Let me instead of the component being a little bit more self-contained, and then somehow we want it to be able to report what's going on, but maybe it doesn't know too much about that. So the component itself, I believe, could expose an event. That would be like the most disconnected.
Yeah.
If it just said, look, somebody clicked something and here's what it is, and whoever's listening, great, knock yourself out.
Right.
And that was, I think we looked at that briefly, the event callbacks. But then the third method we looked at, the state container, is kind of like a do-it-yourself. Hey, include what you want. It could be one or multiple events. It could be methods that you could call. It could be parameters that you could set. So you don't have to. For example, in the example in the blog post, that selected color was a private set.
Mm-hmm.
Only the class could change it. However, anybody could come along and change it by calling set color. So
yeah.
And then there is an example. I wonder if the example would run even though it's .NET 5. And then we could just take a look at it. Let me see if I can get it down real quick.
Okay. And that's over on that GitHub repo you showed?
Yeah, in fact, I should start posting some Okay, so here's everything. First of all, and I'll put this in the chat and we'll make sure we get it in the comments for YouTube. So first, Claudio gave us this post that I showed a little. That's the one we reviewed. He said that he was inspired by Chris Sainty, and I actually found that post as well.
Mm-hmm.
So now both of those links are in our chat. And there was a GitHub repo in the first blog post that says, hey, here's an example. So what I'm going to do with the time that we have left in the year is I'm going to see if we can get that running real quick, we might be able to to examine some of this here. So git clone, and it says it's done. And so I'm not sure. Let's see. Do I have my screen up right now? I forget.
Mine's up.
Okay. So let me switch over there so we can look. Okay. So haven't done anything else other than clone the repo. Take a quick peek at it. There is a solution file in here. So what happens if I just, whoops, why did I say git build? That's like absolutely not at all anything.
That would be an interesting combination.
I could probably have gone and changed it to a .NET 8 project and it might just work, but let's just leave it as is. And I wonder what'll happen if I just say .NET run. Is it going to pick it up? Couldn't find a project. Okay, so that's fine. So let's spell things correctly. Go to component communication, client. And we've got something to run in here. It didn't work. Okay, so.
Inner exception.
But it's complaining about a JSON file that maybe I didn't. Let's see, were there directions? I was hoping maybe like there's some directions here you should be paying attention to. What if we do it this way? What if we say let's just run this in Visual Studio. Interesting that it blew up reading JSON.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So here we are, Visual Studio. Just might get a better idea of what's going on. Program CS. Okay, so WebAssembly based project. So this would be the Blazor WebAssembly style.
So bring it down to your machine.
Yeah, which should be okay. And okay, so let's just do IIS Express. See what happens. Okay, so it is starting. It could be that from the command line. Oh no, actually, it's blowing up if it's decompiling source code. But what is it blowing up on?
I mean, There's a launch setting, Jason, in the repo under properties, but it doesn't look like. I mean, at first glance, doesn't look. I mean, it looks like the typical stuff.
Right.
Although it does have references to IIS, so maybe will this run in IIS?
Well, I went ahead and let it run in IIS Express just to see.
Yeah.
But there is something it's complaining about, and I guess I'm trying to figure out what it is. Wow, that was funny. Okay, so where's the call stack for this? We're all the way back at host builder. So this is pretty early.
Yeah.
Program main. Yeah, we're real early, and it's trying to run. I wonder, one interesting thing is, I don't think I did that right. I'm not 100% sure that I have. Oh, then I put 3. I do have a 5. I have an RC though. So I wonder if there's just some other issues. Maybe we'll just take a look at the code. I was hoping to see it work.
Right.
But in his code, there is not a whole lot going on here and again, this is .NET 5 code, but we were trying to be inspired by it. Add singleton app state. I have a feeling app state is that our thing here? So app state is listed in shared. Here's the set favorite animal stuff.
Yeah,
and I think
that looks like what you were pointing to in the blog post.
Right.
Between the event and then the setting.
And okay, I see. There's different pages, one for each type. It might be interesting to recreate this.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the challenge, and this gets to scoping, right? He's adding that app state in as a singleton, which means it's going to be there for everyone who accesses the app, which isn't going to help us, right? We want to either scope it or transient it to make it.
That's true. And you're looking for somebody who comes to this page is creating their own context that you're going to submit to Dolly. So,
yeah.
But still,
yeah, no, it's a good.
Be curious
good
to
start.
See us try to see the event callback stuff working. I switched back over to your screen there.
Oh, okay. And I'm
just so you know, just so you're not surprised. Now, for everybody watching, that was .NET 5 code, so it could definitely confuse you since we've focused totally on .NET 8 and how in .NET 5 we can see that was the world where you had to pick WebAssembly up front, and that's just how it worked. So
what we could try and do is, let's try this. Let's get rid of this guy. That. This. Okay. It's okay. We've saved all of this, so we're in a good state. If I just, so what we're saying is, if we create a new class, just do this right now. All right, we can add a class, and we're going to call this one. Right, because it's really just the state of the responses that we get back from the questions. Naming's hard.
I know. You can always change the naming later.
Exactly. So this is just public class, and then we know we want a property in here for And I guess that's my initial thought was that our collection of responses is just an array, right? Because I can take that array and I can basically spit that out to text and I get that comma separated. There's a method to do, string.parse and have it be, because that's all I need. I need things in a comma separated list. So that was one way of doing it. Makes it a little tough to add to those components, right? So maybe this right now just needs to be a list of a type string. If I do it this way, and this is kind of the thought process I went through, right? If I do it this way, I've got no way of knowing which version of the string or which item in that list relates to the question, because what if somebody changes their mind? I've got to go replace it. So that was why I started here. Because then I could do a string of, the question, and then the second string is the response. So almost like a key value collection. And maybe I'm overthinking it. So that's up for, feel free to weigh in.
So the homepage doesn't know. It doesn't have any sense of what each of the components is asking about, right?
Correct.
So in order to build what you have to send to Dolly, it needs that initial context, I'm guessing, because we haven't talked enough about what you're actually sending that I'm okay not getting into it too deeply, but
it's okay.
It needs some context to build that query.
No. So I can just, and I've tested this out by giving, because here's a middle part that we're going to do before we pass it on to the image. We're actually going to give it to OpenAI and say, all right, give it, basically generate our image prompt based off of those adjectives. So I've got some text that basically says, you're using these values to generate the prompt to give to, a DALL-E image service, generate the prompt based off of these adjectives. And then, so the page doesn't need to know specifically about the questions. It doesn't need to know any other information other than here is the collection of responses. If we could make it that simple, then it has enough information to process and get an image. This other ceremony we're doing around with making it a list of string or making it a dictionary of string is so that for the use case of somebody changes their mind without completely wiping out the list of components, I need to be able to fire an event and just replace the one that relates to that question.
All right.
Okay.
Well, do we want to see if we can maybe get a callback working, even if it's not doing a whole lot? Okay. So all right. So we need a class like you're doing there.
Yeah. So we also want to do this, right?
Yeah, you're going to have an event. If the event, if the event is just notifying that something changed, it can be an action. If you want it to actually, and then I suppose it'll have access to response state as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now when they say action here, that's so
an action and a func. Those are, I hesitate here that I hope I don't get a lot of this definition incorrect, but in C# we didn't have the ability to pass functions at the very beginning of .NET time. And so the way they were added to the language is we have two classes in the framework. One is action and one is func. Funcs return values, actions are void. Other than that, they're related. And it's almost kind of strange because you say like, well, why do we need two? Mm-hmm. And I actually bet somebody even mildly smarter than I am would know that answer right away. It could be because if you had a class that, so func is a generic that takes both parameters plus what you return, where action, you can pass parameters to actions, but they're not going to return anything. This is the underlying things. This is what underlies Lambda expressions.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever done that before where you've instead of actually writing the lambda in place, it takes a func.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll go write that func somewhere else, but you might write it as a lambda. You don't have to, but you could.
Yeah. And pass
So-
it back. Yeah.
So in any case, if you're saying that in the example that we got from both blog posts,
Yes.
in that, and I'm not saying that the example is the end all, but in that particular example, they are using an action, probably because I'm guessing what's happening here is since app state is registered as a service,
Mm-hmm.
the parent component is listening to the action and says, okay, let me go look at selected color now.
Okay. Interesting. It's we want so when response changes, we want to be able to either update responses, which means we're not necessarily passing something back, we're updating that property. Or if we can't do that directly, we need to pass back to whatever's listening for that on response change to say, here's the new value you need to account for.
Yeah, in their example, they have a selected color. And because there's only one selected color at a time,
Mm-hmm.
the event is just simply notifying the world, hey, selected color changed. And so components that are interested in rendering it say, well, let me go see what it is.
Okay.
Which could be if your response, if when somebody calls on response changed, if you feel that responses dictionary is correct or even mostly correct just to see this work, then you could say, okay, well, the home component is listening for that. And whenever it sees on response change, it's going to say, all right, let me look in that responses dictionary and create my query, my Dolly. I don't know if I should be calling it a query, but
yeah,
what I'm going to call Dolly with. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then this is complaining because the response change. That property must have both add and remove accessors.
So you don't actually have to have a get set there.
Oh.
You just have that. And then now, if you want, see, now the issue that we have is we need a way for somebody who's adding to responses to fire the action.
Okay.
And there are one way to do it.
Just put a method.
Is you could create a method. This isn't the only way to do it. This is what they did.
Uh-huh.
I suppose that technically, I think this is true, that a component who had access to this response state could fire the action itself.
Mm.
But if you create a method saying, like add response,
Yep.
then it could take the two strings. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Look what it's trying to do there. Woo! That's basically, I think, mostly what I was going to say. In the blog post, they abstract that one level further. I don't know that you have to by creating a notify state change method that actually calls invoked. And I think that's just one more level of abstraction so that basically an interested caller could say, I don't want to set a color, but I do want to notify state has changed.
Yeah.
And I don't know what gremlins we're going to run into that made that approach useful, but I feel like this should do what you want.
Feels like it, right? Now,
yeah.
So we got this. So I think what we want to do though is add inside of here.
Right. Now we're going to expose that to the world, right? So I think I'm a little behind you, but I'm trying to catch up as well.
Oh.
No, you're fine. You're doing great. I'm just trying to make sure I know where. Yeah. So add. Now this is added as a singleton.
Yes. Well, they added theirs as a singleton.
But you want to add it scoped.
Yes.
Or transient. Or okay. I gotcha.
Yeah. I think scoped is where we want because we want it for this particular page request.
Yep.
We want to have it.
You want its own.
Yes. Yep.
All right. Well, we'll find out.
that should do. But then okay, so that's the program. And then when I go to the question component up here, I should have to inject.
Yeah, now we're in a component.
Our response state. Not liking, is it not liking it? Or
let's see.
Inject X in identifier. That's not gonna work.
Poking around here too. Let's see. Yeah, inject response state, and then you couldn't call it anything. It didn't like that.
It didn't. Just build it quick to make sure it sees all of those.
Okay.
Build failed. Oh, we still got this going on. But let's get rid of this because that's not needed. Model. Still saying I've got 2 warnings.
Or 2 errors or something. Oh no.
Yeah. Maybe not.
Well,
okay.
Does that thing? I don't know. Does that thing update right away? We'll see. You tried building again and it didn't work.
Build starter. Oh, here we go.
Oh, I see.
It's down the bottom.
I think what happened is you didn't finish off the inject directive. Yeah. It's got to have a name. So response state is fine. That'll be the name of the instance that's injected.
Oh, so actually,
yeah. So now it's going to inject a response state instance, but it's got to have a name in this class. And so you've just made it response state, which is okay.
Okay. I see what you're saying. Right. So now we have something to reference it by.
Yep.
So we can go down
now all
here.
you got to do is when somebody, right.
That's pretty close. Actually, it is question name we want because question text can be it. So question name for us is just looking back here. Oh, and that's rebuilding, so it's not going to see it. You can kind of see it here in the highlight, but basically the color and how are you feeling, those are keywords that we can use to identify the question, which is what we want for the model. Because those will persist regardless of what's being asked.
Yep.
Okay.
Now, the only thing left is for someone to listen.
Yes, and we want that to be here.
Yeah, and here, in your on initialized,
okay,
is a place where you could listen, I suppose. In the example, they take advantage of state has changed, which is basically because the component is just rendering the guts of the state anyway. It's right. Rendering the selected color. Okay. But I feel like you don't have to do that just to see it work. It depends on if you're more comfortable. Like I want to see things working in the debugger first. That you could basically, you're going to have to inject the response state into this component too. And then response state is going to have the on method that you can subscribe to.
That I can subscribe to.
Yeah, so in on initialized, you can say response state dot. And I'm hoping that we get some help here. So there's your on response changed. Now, I think theoretically you could do what it's saying and create a method. And I actually don't think that's a horrible idea because then we could set a breakpoint in there and just kind of see what's going on. So.
Oh, I see. So this being
I'm not saying this is where your code will finish up. No, you don't have to leave it like that. Now if you right click on there, I think it'll help you create that method. I think if you do a quick refactoring here, it's been a while since I've done event stuff, believe it or not, but I thought it was going to say, oh, it didn't do it. So I think that if you hit tab when you're creating this, that it helps you. I don't know if it'll do it now.
Yeah, it's kind of after. So let's do.
And see, and now it's like, oh, but you didn't want my help.
Go Copilot here on. Wow. Changed. Okay.
Okay, so that's fine. So you should be able to just make the method.
Yep.
And look, it's trying to help you.
Too late. I don't want your help.
Kind of what I was thinking was is this is just to see it, right?
Yeah.
So even if you just set a breakpoint down there, I'm fine with just saying like what happens.
Yeah.
When this runs, oh, why is it complaining?
No response overload matches delegate action. Is that because we're returning a void?
Oh, the delegate for this, it doesn't take any methods. It doesn't take anything. So I think that the object sender stuff was superfluous. That was Copilot sort of goofing with us. Your particular event doesn't take any parameters. It doesn't pass any parameters.
Yep. That makes sense.
So,
okay.
I'd be curious if this, at least it's really bubblegum and duct tape, but I wonder if this at least shows us, where you're headed. And then on a future show, maybe we say, okay, we've got the whole ball of wax for folks who want to use this technique. In the blog post, so what it does in the blog post that maybe we would want to head to is that instead of implementing your own method to do something, essentially the blog post just says like, okay, when this event fires, then let me fire this component state has changed. And that's just going to re-render all of the data binding. And so if we can get that collection binding working where previously you couldn't, it just wasn't working for you. If we could get that working, then you could go to that more elegant feeling. I'm not saying it's better. It just seems more elegant.
Yeah.
Sometimes though, elegance comes as a price because then you look at it and say like, what is it doing?
Yeah. 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 Because, as soon as it doesn't do what we expect it to do, now we got to try and dig into it and fix it. So absolutely. All right. Let's bring this guy here. So there's our application. I'll bring this down a little bit. Let's say blue. Yep.
Okay, so what I think might have happened here is responses might be null because I'm not sure that it was ever initialized.
And responses
is response state. Is response state actually? Yeah. See how you have a responses dictionary, but I don't think it was initialized.
So if I do CTOR.
Yeah, and I could just try again.
That should be enough, right? And then go changes applied successfully.
Did you try hot reload? Yeah, that would be cool.
I did. But it's probably still on component.
I think you're still on the breakpoint, yeah. Which
all right,
I think the breakpoint, yeah, that page is dead. Like that page wasn't going to work, but I feel like maybe you're right. You might have rescued the server, but that's okay. We'll restart it. Okay. Let's see what happens. Click blue, click bold. And we're not seeing anything.
Because I didn't do that. All right, reload one more time.
Okay, so you add, and then I guess if you F11 there, what happens? Yeah, I love that one.
Hmm.
Oh, it did complain about something.
Let's see. We went back because I reloaded the page. Let's do this.
You know what it might have been?
What's that?
It said something about adding the same key. Let's try that again. Let's see what happens. So you click blue, and
Mhm.
responses is empty right now, right? It's a valid collection that's empty.
I guess I'm not getting any IntelliSense over the
Okay.
object, which
All
is
right.
interesting. Okay. But if I do, let's F11.
Wow. Okay.
Still not getting. That's
Interesting.
weird.
So one thing that's interesting here is it doesn't look like any of the code we added is firing because we're not using add response.
It's possible. Well, response. Oh, yeah, that's a good point. We're just adding responses to.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
We made this method to do it, and then Copilot sort of tricked us into being like, don't you just want this? And it's like, nah. And I think add response is just a method on response state. So you can dump that responses portion.
Yeah. Let's try that then.
So you've got a little bit to do there still.
Yeah.
So responses goes away in that same line. Because you're calling a method on it, not actually activating the collection. And then, yeah, just add response. So,
okay.
you know what? It got by me too. I was just sit there and said like, oh, that seems good.
Right, because
So
this is here and there's my string. Okay, that makes sense. Now from here.
Okay, so it hit a breakpoint on creating your new dictionary.
Oh, because
so you're sitting on that. And there we go. Okay, another one. And then blue. And now we're going to add response. And that's going to go here. Cool. Going to add it to the collection. Interesting thing here, though, is I think you might have an issue with a duplicate key, but that's all right. Then it's going to invoke it, which did, who knows? Nothing.
Right, and the rest of these are all going to be, I'm just going to F5 through that. Now we've got this. We're going to go to this key. It should do the same thing.
But I don't feel like your on response change invoked. Or at least we didn't see it hit the breakpoint in the parent component, which is what we were expecting.
True. Let's if I could spell. Hang on. I get a count of 2, which all looks good. So it's added them there,
right?
But we didn't. I agree. We did not get a triggering of the action that we saw.
Yeah,
and we know that because back here we didn't get to this.
Right. And I'm sure that line of code that subscribed ran. I'm sure it did.
Yeah.
That's interesting because you have responses there. Oh, I see. That's the old response state. I gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, which you probably, for all it did was basically took it and assigned it to here, so we had it. Or that's what it would do.
So here's where I'm a little concerned about scoped and why this method might not work for us.
Okay.
Just for giggles, let's change it to a singleton. Is I'm wondering if you're getting a scoped instance of response state per component. This is probably in the documentation. And, you know. Okay, so I don't know if it has to be restarted, or at least, oh, hold on. Okay, so now that's being registered or subscribed. Maybe it was before. I don't know. Okay, I suppose go ahead and click another one and we'll see.
Which this should fail, right? Because we got multiple keys now. Yeah, same key
Yeah,
added.
so it doesn't like that. Okay.
So we need to do something here on the add response to check if that key exists, and if so, just replace it.
Yeah. Although if we start over real quick, we can at least see the first one added and just make sure that this event's working. But I agree with you. There's work to do on this state. And it sort of brings up some other issues. Like you said, it being a singleton isn't, I don't, huh. Being a singleton feels weird because you want different people to use this at once. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure what I'm missing here. Unless it's still, well, whatever. We'll figure that out.
So we get here. We get to this, to this, to this.
I feel like that one. There you go.
There we go.
It is. That's it.
That worked.
So they were each getting their own instance of your response state.
Yep.
That makes me wonder, though, about like that seems weird because here is advice to use add singleton, but you would think you're going to have a problem with just even multiple people using the app. Am I just wrong?
I don't think so. I think that's well,
it does say here though.
So
it
then
does say a singleton must be thread safe. Registering a dependency as a singleton is acceptable when the class has no state or in a server-side app has state that can be shared across all users connected to the same server. You know, I feel like that works. That technique is working in Blazor WebAssembly because WebAssembly is running in your browser. You're the only one.
Yeah.
That's working in WebAssembly, but it's not going to work in server side.
No. But there's a role for, so here's the way I looked at it. There's a role for singleton here, and that's for the data because the data doesn't change, right?
Okay.
The information that is our questions, I only need to get that once. Once that class gets here, everybody else can use that class.
What you could do instead of it being this complicated is could a component as part of the event, as part of its event args, pass up its current state? And so now you're not trying to maintain state across components. It's just the component basically says, hey, here's my current state. And the home component goes like, okay, fine. I'll merge it in. I'll figure out what to do because I'm keeping state as well. Like I'm keeping what I'm hearing from the various components.
When does it do that? When asked by the parent or?
Oh, because you need it when somebody clicks the submit button, right?
Yeah.
And we
either I have it already because I've got that class built.
Yeah.
And I've heard all the events along the way, or I now need to go ask everybody, all right, what's your state? Because I'm going to go submit.
Right. And I feel like either method's okay.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say, I don't think there's a right or wrong way of doing it. It's just, how do we want to wire this one up? Because you can think about it and say, well, if you don't submit, it's extra work to do all the notifications. But then I need to rely on the components maintaining their own state.
Yeah, I hear you. So, this is not the same thing as persisting state. There are some state management articles that are talking more about persisting users' data state across, while they're using the app across a session. But maybe persist state across ticket circuits, server-side storage. See, this isn't quite the same browser storage. Yeah, I feel like this isn't quite the same thing. You have components that you want to interact, but maybe without having to kind of join them up too much, because if you do that, if you couple them to the point that you might as well just make one component that renders everything.
Exactly. And that's kind of that feels anti to what Blazor is all about, especially in this kind of scenario.
Right.
Okay.
Well, the thing that I kind of like is that we got the event firing across components working, even though it didn't do what we wanted.
Right.
And certainly we could use that technique to share state in certain situations. There's still, it's still interesting that cascading parameters enable components to pass data across a component hierarchy. And now the example there is a UI tab set, which maybe isn't quite the same thing, but I feel what you're saying here is, I think we've got a little bit of looking around to do as to if you want to make a component that's really a collection of components. And I like this example because it feels to me like you could use this in like a quiz or a puzzle. And that way the component that's administering the quiz, it just knows, here, give me a list of questions. And I'm not even the one going out and checking the answers. The components know how to do that. They're just telling me right or wrong, and I give you a percentage.
That's interesting.
And it's similar to what you're doing. It's similar.
Right. It's where instead of saying here's a collection, here's the component that is the collection of question components, we're using the home as a way of doing that.
Yeah. Right now, you could take that home page and abstract it out into a component. You just haven't done that yet, and that's fine. And you don't have to.
Right.
There's always a point where maybe we've done more than we need to do.
Right.
Any Blazor application, you could keep refactoring so that the pages are so incredibly nothing. We could do that, but at some point, I think even the most like architecture wonk among us should stop and say, hold on, who's my audience?
Yeah.
How much more maintenance am I expecting to do on this thing? If the answer is a lot, then you want to put more work into your separation of concerns so that maintenance is easier. But if it's like, look, we're doing this thing, it's going to go out. I don't expect famous last words. I don't expect a whole lot of changes to it. 6 people are using it at a time.
Yeah.
Don't kill yourself over getting work done.
Yeah. Yeah. At some point, this is one of those things that I want to get out and get people start hitting against, because it tells a good story around around pulling those things together. So what I think I'm going to do is continue down the path we have here of, seeing if this response state object can hold our responses, get them to the point where I can get them back when I hit that submit button.
Yeah.
And just be able to send them along.
Because that's what I'm wondering is, instead of us trying to have one response state object, what if the event passed a parameter and said, here's my response state, here's where I'm at right now. And so now when that event is received in the parent component, it says, okay, I don't know who you are, but here's your current dictionary. I agree that you kind of had an issue that you were talking about where, how do you merge that with the parent dictionary? But maybe that's solvable. And that way, this is a little bit simpler, and you don't have to register. You wouldn't have to register any kind of service. Well, I take that back. You would, because as of right now, that shared service is what's allowing you to, at least in this particular example, is what's allowing you to listen on the event. But I don't know that that's like event callbacks themselves. That was the first example in that blog post.
Right.
Is that the parent then says, let's see, is the parent, what's going on here? The parent. I think in the first example, the parent is basically he's showing you an example of where both the child and parent component could respond to each other's clicks. So it's possible that that's an option you could use that's a little bit lower impact than this whole state container example. Okay, cool. All right. Well, have we done enough damage?
I think so. Let me see. I was trying to bring that back up.
Oh, hold on.
Link.
Put it back.
Oh, okay, cool.
Oh, nice.
I was just trying to get to this, which was the article
Yeah.
that you had. Okay.
Right. And so event callbacks, the first one, this seems a lot lower impact because the child component on a click is invoking an on-click method that basically anybody who subscribes to it can deal with it.
Okay.
And then the next example is the parent saying, okay, I will call the child components on, I'm sorry, when the child components on click method fires, call click handler.
Okay. Oh, okay. And then that's this here. Interesting.
Right. So that's a Blazor, that's a method supported right inside Blazor that basically says, hey, any component, can invoke a method. And the fact that, what makes this a little confusing, in my opinion, is because the event callback is called on click.
Yeah.
That makes it a little confusing in the second code sample to be like, oh, does that mean this only works when clicking? No, I think you could change that same thing to Joe's gas station or whatever, and it should still work because to me, that's just a name.
Mm-hmm.
It's a parameter that this component takes that just so happens to be an event callback.
Yeah.
So as long as I supply you one that meets the requirements, then it will get called.
Sure.
So that's one way is the child components have event callback parameters that you subscribe to in the parent. That's something you could do.
Yeah. And yeah, I could see that. I could see that happening. That seems a little more tightly wired than, although it is, maybe not, because then, the component is saying, if you want to enable this, this is how I function, kind of thing.
Yeah. I'm giving anybody who calls one way to hear when I've changed state.
Yep.
And if you don't want to use it, fine. Maybe you don't care about it.
Yeah.
I agree that there's probably no scenario where you don't feel like a contract is being created, but I suppose that's just how it is. If a child component, if two components are going to talk, there has to be some kind of contract, whether it's event-based, cascading value-based, cascading parameter-based, or even that state component that we saw at the beginning.
Right. Which I do like. That to me feels closest to what we want to get to, but it still needs a little work.
Yeah, the one thing that I don't know, the thing that we're missing is that this particular method of using it has us doing that as a singleton, which I know is not exactly what you're looking for. So it would almost be like, what if we went the same way and the parent component created this state, and as it was creating the client components passed it along, and then the client component said, well, I know how to wire myself up with this. You've given me a state. The state has an event that I should be invoking. Okay, fine. Mm-hmm. I'll do that. That's kind of gives you the reverse methodology but in either case, it still feels like there's at least some level of contract between the components. Otherwise, they can't work together.
Right. Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. Not overthink. I have to not overthink it.
It's easy to do, though. It's easy, right? Because we're all thinking there's got to be some more elegant way. It's super easy to think there must be a more elegant way. There must be a more elegant way. And here's where, not having worked with Blazor as much again, Blazor's been around since ASP.NET Core 3. I don't remember exactly which one, whether it was 3 or 3.1. I don't remember for sure.
5+ years, right?
Yeah, it's 5 years old now, and
Mhm.
yet at the same time, this is the version that really got my attention and said, okay, I want to dive in and learn more. And so there's a lot of basics still we're still learning about. So
Yep, absolutely.
all right.
Cool. That was fun. I still got
Yeah,
some
well,
work to
thanks
do,
for
so
walking through that. That's it's always can be a little nerve-wracking to walk through your code and hope everything works for everybody. So appreciate you showing that sample. That's really cool.
yeah, and I know I'm this particular part of the code has not been checked back in, but it is a public repo I have on my site, up on my GitHub page. So once I get this part working, I will certainly check this version of it back up there.
Yeah. So I'm hearing that StreamYard is now supporting comments made on Twitter. I don't exactly know how that works. I don't know
Hmm.
if there's a hashtag. I just don't know. So in any case, today, live broadcasting to YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and my personal LinkedIn. Hopefully someday that's the Dev Talk Show LinkedIn. But if you're watching in the future, then that means you're watching us on YouTube, which is where all the replays are at youtube.com/the Dev Talk Show. And that's it for 2023, I guess. So,
Yeah, that's a good thing.
so it's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining me in the mornings. I'm glad we were able to kind of get things going again when we lost the ability to do the evening shows just for a variety of reasons. This has worked out pretty well. It's been a good time. I think the hour today we went over, but I think the hour has forced us to maybe get to the point, not ramble as much, be a little more focused.
Yeah.
Sometimes constraints are good and helpful.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And it gives us, time box a little bit. We get something really interesting that happens as a result of that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, it's always I love when the last 15 minutes something fun happens. So once again, thank all of you for joining us. We do have some people that joined live. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Watching in the future, don't hesitate to, if you really like what we're doing, hit the like button, subscribe so you know when we're live. And if you have questions or even have advice for us, put it down in the comments. That's really helpful. And John was here with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great new year as well. Everybody do the same. Have a safe and happy new year. And we'll see you all in 2024 on the Dev Talk Show.